The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. Jesus and his disciples left from there and began a journey through Galilee, but he did not wish anyone to know about it. He was teaching his disciples and telling them, "The Son of Man is to be handed over to men, and they will kill him. And 3 days after his death, the Son of Man will rise." But they did not understand the saying, and they were afraid to question him. They came to Capernaum, and once inside the house, he began to ask them, "What were you arguing about on the way?" But they remained silent. They had been discussing among themselves on the way who was the greatest. Then he sat down, called the 12, and said to them, "If anyone wishes to be first, he shall be the last of all and the servant of all." Taking a child, he placed it in their midst, and putting his arms around it, he said to them, "Whoever receives one child such as this in my name receives me, and whoever receives me receives not me, but the one who sent me." The Gospel of the Lord. Place yourselves in this gospel story. Jesus and his disciples, and in our imagination also us, embark on that journey through Galilee. A long road, the monotony of the journey broken up by Jesus is speaking a message to his disciples that they must carry their cross, that he is going to have to die and suffer. And the disciples in the back, perhaps, not really wanting to listen to that difficult message, discussing amongst themselves who will be the greatest, how they can rise up amongst each other, who's better than everyone else. They arrive at that house in Capernaum, and Jesus asked them, "What were you discussing along the way? What were you arguing about?" He already knows. And so he answers his own question that causes them to just pause in silent shame. He answers them by showing them an example. He takes a child, and he says, "If anyone would be first, he must be last of all and servant of all." I think we should pause here and ask ourselves, is Jesus, with these words, condemning the desire to excel? Is he just condemning the desire that we find in ourselves to do great things in life, to give the best of oneself? And does he instead favor laziness, a defeatist spirit, and does he encourage his disciples to be negligent? Certainly, this was the impression that the philosopher Nietzsche had of Christianity. And so he, in promoting what some modern philosophers would say, in promoting what most modern man believes, even if he hasn't read Nietzsche, Nietzsche found Christianity guilty, in his opinion, of having introduced into the world the cancer of humility, that inordinate self-denial, to combat that, in his work, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he presents the will to power, which is embodied, he says, by the Superman, the man of great health, the man who wishes not to humble himself, but to raise himself up above all other men. Now, it might be that Nietzsche had this impression of what was, in his opinion, the error of Christianity, because some Christians may have misinterpreted Jesus' thought and may have given occasion to this misunderstanding. Perhaps they had not lived the gospel to its fullest. But as we read today's gospel, we do not see Jesus teaching us that the desire to excel is something wrong. Rather, he says the words, "If any would be first," which implies, therefore, that it is possible to want to be first, that it is not prohibited to do so, it is not sinful to desire to be great. With these words, not only does Jesus not prohibit the desire, but he also encourages it. However, he reveals a different and new way to achieve greatness, not at the cost of others, but in favor of others. And so he adds, "If you desire to be first, you must be the last of all and the servant of all." Now, I think we should pause and compare these two ways of being great. The one proposed by Nietzsche and I think adopted by modern man, and the one proposed by our Lord. Nietzsche's way, with the will to power, leads to a situation in which one must impose himself on the rest and let the others serve him. That one can only be happy, if happiness is even possible, by making everyone else unhappy. That there can be only one victor and the rest must be vanquished. That there can be only one who dominates and the rest must be dominated. And we know with what results this way of this idea about being the Superman leads to. We know how it resulted when this philosophy was implemented by Hitler. But it's not just Nazism which leads to the evils of humanity. For we see that this will to power which Nietzsche proposes and which certainly Hitler embodied is nothing new. It's part of us since the fall. And so St. James, in his second letter today, he speaks about this. He asks that difficult and agonizing question, what causes wars? Where does evil and discord come from? And in the gospel, Jesus gives us the answer. It's that desire to place oneself first and to use other people to achieve your own greatness. And so we should pause to think that predominance, that desire for predominance by means of dominating others, that desire for one nation to dominate other nations, for one race to dominate other races, for one party to demonize and make the other party seem horrible, for one sex to dominate the other, for one religion to be predominant over the other at the expense of others. This is what self-service leads to. But in opposition to this, the authentic Christian life imitates Christ, who, it is said, came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for others. And so when we live our lives in service to all, it actually benefits everyone. Whoever is great in service is not only great themselves, but also makes others great. Rather than raising himself above others, he raises others with him. And when we look at the great dictators of the world, those who sought greatness by dominating, and we look at them through the lens of history, we can pause and ask ourselves, were they truly great? Did they live lives that we would want to emulate? Are they our heroes? And the effect that they had on the world by means of their greatness, is that the sort of effect that we want to have? Is that the sort of effect that truly can be called, through the lens of history, great? Rather, when we look at somebody who embodies the Christian ideal, and in my own lifetime, I think the person who did that most perfectly would be Blessed Mother Teresa of Calcutta, a woman who truly was great, Why? Because she lived each moment of her life in service to the poor, to those who were least amongst all of humanity. In living her life, spending herself, giving of herself in self-sacrifice day in and day out. Truly, we can look on her life and see a profound impact on the world. Truly, we can look back at her life and say she achieved greatness. She certainly deserves to be first amongst so many. And we see that she is so great because of her service, because of her imitation of Christ. But let's make this a little bit more personal. Let's look in our own lives. Is Jesus calling us to be great? Is Jesus calling us in our desire to be greatness to sacrifice and lay down our desire to excel at business or to excel in sports? And I think we can obviously now realize that the answer is going to be no. But we need to be excellent. We need to be great in an authentic manner of service. In our business, we cannot be cheating. In our sports, we should seek to be great by building up good skills in ourselves rather than seeking to destroy others. There's nothing wrong with the Nationals having risen up out of the cellar of baseball. They did so primarily by building up their team, by serving, by growing and focusing on that long-term growth potential. They didn't do it by breaking the kneecaps of their competitors. Though we've seen that also in sports, haven't we? St. Paul tells us that when we compete, we can race so as to win, that there can be that greatness. But it must be, our Lord says, a greatness achieved through service. And so there he was in the midst of his apostles, taking that small child and pointing out the small child. Now, in the Jewish understanding, the child would be the one without any rights, the one who was truly weakest in Jewish society. I think, though, in our own meditation on this gospel, when we think about the silence that must be experienced by us as we have this conversation that our Lord had with his disciples, as we have this conversation with our Lord, rather than taking the child from our midst, our Lord would take the unborn baby, the one who in our American society has no rights. And he would ask us, what have you done in service to this baby? And how many of us would be reduced to that same shameful silence that the apostles experienced in today's gospel? My brothers and sisters, if we want to be great, we must give ourselves in service to those who are weakest among us. And can anyone think of anyone who is weaker, anyone who is poorer, anyone who is more in need of our love than the one who has no rights, no freedom, no voice, the one whom it is legal to murder? My brothers and sisters, we must commit ourselves to serving this pro-life movement. We cannot grow tired. We cannot let that fall to a second burner. Put it on the back. No, this must be how we are going to be great. This must be how we are going to live our lives so that we can be great and our nation can once again find its greatness. For truly, Jesus says, greatness is not to desire greatness is not a sin. But we cannot be great by seeking to dominate others, by seeking to use others, by objectifying others and looking at them as how they affect us. Rather, we must seek to be great, and our nation can only be great if we have a heart of service. If we give of ourselves, dominating those passions and that desire for self-service, and replacing it with self-sacrifice, giving to others. And so, my brothers and sisters, in the silence of our hearts, as we allow our Lord to ask us, what were we doing along the way to heaven? Let us reflect and commit ourselves to changing so that we can honestly say we served the weakest. We sought to be last in the eyes of the world so as to be great in the eyes of God.